Hello, my name is Christopher Renstrom. I'm the creator of rulingplanets.com and Christopher Renstrom Astrology. And I want to welcome you to my September horoscope forecast for 2024. September gets off to a fascinating start with a major, not so major shift taking place with two modern planets. The planets are Uranus, turning retrograde on September 1st, and Pluto. Pluto retrograding back down into the zodiac sign of Capricorn, also on September 1st. Now, what I mean to say by saying major, not so major occurrences taking place is that these are subtle yet very resonant shifts in planetary energy. Let's start with Uranus turning retrograde on September 1st. Uranus, as you may recall, is the planet of revolution and change. It's famous for turning things upside down and inside out in your life. It's the wild card planet in astrology. Now, when a planet is turning retrograde, that means it begins to travel backwards in the sky. Now, the planet doesn't actually travel backwards in the sky, because if it did, we would all be in a lot of trouble. And astrologers say that when a planet is retrograde, it often acts in the way that is opposite to the way that it normally behaves. So, Uranus, the planet of revolution and change, turning retrograde on September 1st, might mean a spell of stability, a spell of consistency, a period of time where things aren't being turned upside down or inside out. And that's kind of the idea of the retrograde. Now, this may be the first time since January, when Uranus came out of retrograde, that you might be feeling some kind of stability in your life, where you can sort of see where things are going, and there aren't going to be any more surprise upsets. Now, that's one of those cross your fingers moments where you're hoping there will be no more surprise upset. But when Uranus is retrograde, it dials down the volatility, it bumps up the stability, and it shows a willingness on the part of the people in your life to behave themselves and to stop kicking one another under the table. But can things ever return to normal after Uranus has worked its chaos magic? Unlikely. But finding out what has changed and looking for ways to incorporate these changes into your new normal, well, that will be the story of your life for the next 5 months. Signs most affected are Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. Now, the other thing that will be happening on September 1st is Pluto will be retrograding back down into the zodiac sign of Capricorn. Now, Pluto, as you may recall, turned retrograde last May 2nd to be exact. It turned retrograde in the zodiac sign of Aquarius. And since then, it has been traveling backwards through the sky. But on September 1st, it re-enters the zodiac sign of Capricorn, much to the consternation of Capricorns, Aries, Cancers, and Libras out there. Now, these are the 4 signs that have really had to contend with Pluto in Capricorn since 2008, 2009. And when Pluto left Capricorn and entered Aquarius, these were 4 signs that were very much like, yay, goodbye, Pluto. Hope to never see you again. Don't let the door knock you over on the way out. Well, unfortunately, Pluto is retrograding back down into Capricorn. But is that really unfortunate? My feeling about this is no. Now, why would I give this kind of silver lining idea to Pluto retrograding back down into Capricorn? Pluto is the planet of ordeals and the transformations that arise from them. It's the idea that the only way that we evolve as a person is going through hardships and difficulties. Now, that's not really like Saturn. Saturn is the planet of tests, trials, and tribulations. It will block your progress on the path that you've chosen to take. Pluto acts a bit differently. It's only by descending down into parts of ourselves that we're not really that comfortable with, the subterranean parts of ourselves that are associated to our psyche. It's only by descending down into this sort of shadow realm that we connect to Pluto in our lives. A Pluto transit can be associated with the loss of things or the landscape changing in your life through loss or through grief or through separation. It can also be associated to things suddenly not working the way that they used to work before. And so feeling a bit alienated or like you don't really understand your life, almost like you're on the outside of your life looking in. These are all things that are associated to Pluto traveling through a zodiac sign. Pluto's job in a zodiac sign is to bring out the essence of that sign itself. So since 2008, 2009, people born under Capricorn, Aries, Cancer, and Libra were contending with very difficult battles going on within themselves, in which the stakes were very, very high. But at the same time, there was this kind of rebirth that was taking place. There was this sort of growing into one's self, maturation, but on a very deep and a very profound level. Pluto, being the planet of ordeals and the transformations that arise from them, rewards those who have gone through its difficulties. If you have descended down into the underworld of yourself, and if you have survived that journey, then you emerge reborn, basically. You reemerge a much more powerful personality, but the power comes from the fact that you are more in touch with yourself than you have ever been before. This is one of the great gifts of Pluto. So with Pluto re-entering the zodiac sign of Capricorn, and it re-enters on September 1st, and it will be retrograde until October 11th, when it turns direct, moves forward again, and leaves Capricorn and re-enters Aquarius on November 19th. This passage, this sort of return to Pluto in the zodiac sign of Capricorn, this is really about Pluto checking out its handiwork, okay? It's sort of checking out how you're doing. And so it's not going to be a return to difficulty. It's going to be really more of a reassuring transit, a reassurance that the choices that you made are the right choices to make, that the path that you're on is the right path that you're traveling. It still may be bumpy in certain areas, but you know in your soul, you know in your gut that what you're doing is right. And so Pluto's job by retrograding back down into Capricorn is to make sure that you're committed to that forward motion, to that forward direction, and that you're not delaying, that you're not postponing, that you're not, maybe questioning and waffling and going back the way that you came. And as I said before, Pluto rewards those who have braved its ordeals. It rewards it with a boon of some sort. So that can be a physical one, like a monetary reward, or it can be a very powerful psychological reward, a sense of really knowing who you are for the first time in years. But what Pluto will also give you is a certain fearlessness, this sense that not only are you on the right path, but you're not going to be diminished again, that no matter what comes, you will stand up to that challenge or you will stand up to that difficulty. Doesn't necessarily mean you're going to win or triumph all the time, but there's a fearlessness. There's no longer this timidity. There's no longer this ambient anxiety. A certain cornerstone has been laid in place in your psyche. This fearlessness is a singular gift of Pluto, and it's something that will never, ever go away again. Signs most affected are Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. On September 2nd, there will be a new moon in Virgo. The new moon in Virgo will bring the focus back to your body. Now, there are some people who live in their heads. There are some people who live in their emotional angst. There are some people who live going from one spiritual crisis to another, and then there are others who obsess over finances, and this can cause them great anxiety and consternation. What the new moon in Virgo does is that it centers you back in your body again. gets you out of your head. It gets you out of your heart. It gets you out of your philosophical quandaries, and it gets out of your financial anxieties, and it puts you back in your body again. It centers you. And this is good because our body is something that we often take for granted. Our body is often something that we ignore in the revolving door of our lives, where we go from one set of problems that need solving to another set of problems that need solving. What we don't always acknowledge is the toll that it takes on our body, the toll that fears take, the toll that anxieties take, the toll that frustrations take, the toll that bad diets take on our body. So the big question that the new moon in Virgo is going to ask is, how do you treat your body? Do you treat your body like a temple, or do you treat your body like a pup tent? This would be a good time to get a physical, to consult with a nutritionist, or meet with an acupuncturist to see how your body is doing. Now, this isn't about getting yourself in shape. It's about seeing what kind of shape you are in. So take this cue from the new moon in Virgo to reconnect with your physical being. You'll be glad you did. Signs most affected are Taurus, Leo, Cancer, Virgo, and Capricorn. On September 3rd, Mars enters the zodiac sign of Cancer. Cancer, as you might recall, is the zodiac sign of hearth, home, and family. It's ruled by the moon, which represents the mother in an astrological chart, and Cancer is a zodiac sign that's very much concerned with our roots, with our past, and with our family concerns, and our family responsibilities. And Mars, the warrior planet, will be traveling through the zodiac sign of Cancer for the next 8 weeks. So what happens when you have Mars, named after the Roman god of war, traveling through the zodiac sign of Cancer? Well, as you might imagine, it's going to bring out all of your protective instincts. Okay, it's going to bring out protective instincts dealing with your spouse or partner. It's going to bring out protective instincts dealing with your children. It's going to bring out protective instincts dealing with your family. It's going to bring out protective instincts dealing with your pet or pets, or whatever wonderful menagerie of animals and birds may frequent your backyard. So all of this energy of protectiveness is going to come out with Mars traveling through Cancer. Mars traveling through Cancer is kind of the don't mess with anyone I care about because I can take you out, all right? So with Mars moving through this zodiac sign, what might start to happen is that you might start experiencing what we call nowadays triggers. Okay, there may be things that occur, maybe it's a disagreement or it's an argument, and it reminds you instantly of a disagreement or an argument that you had before. Now, I'm not saying that necessarily you're going to have a flashback, back to the 3rd grade where Billy made fun of the toys that you were playing with and kicked sand in your face or something along those lines. But you may have an emotional response that might be very volatile and it might be very powerful. It might be along the lines of how a child might respond to a situation. Now, I'm not saying that you're going to be childish because you're an adult now. You might be stoked by a fury or a retaliation or wanting to get back at someone. This might come from a childhood experience. This might come from a time of life where you were younger and there was a dispute or fight and it was left unresolved. So you can expect to have a very powerful reaction to anything that smacks of rejection, competition, or being ignored. That's why it's going to be very important for you over the next 8 weeks to take a moment to relax and to chill out and to remember that when you're arguing with your spouse or your lover, that they aren't your father who always disapproved of you, or that when you're having disagreements with coworkers at work, they are not the kids in grade school who used to gang up on you. You want to stay in the moment and to stay in the here and now. Mars will be traveling through the zodiac sign of Cancer through November 3rd. Signs most affected are Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn. On September 7th, Mercury will be forming a square to the planet Uranus. Now, this is the third time that Mercury will be forming a square to the planet Uranus. The reason for this is because of the Mercury retrograde. And because of the Mercury retrograde, it forms this square 3 times. Now, Mercury is the planet of commerce. It's the planet of buying and selling. It's also a planet that's associated to communications. And it's also the planet of technology. So when Mercury forms a square to Uranus, Uranus is the planet of revolution and change. Those things like buying and selling, those things like communication, those things like the smooth running of your day-to-day life is upset. It's completely thrown upside down into the air. Now, the first time that Mercury formed a square to Uranus was on July 21st. For those of you who might not remember that date, that's the day when President Biden decided to not run for president. He removed himself from the presidential race. It was also 2 days after the CrowdStrike fiasco. That was when someone was loading up software and it made all the systems around the world crash. This resulted in the grounding of airplanes, in lack of access to some banks, and in the disruption of healthcare systems. These are things that, as you can imagine, would be associated with Mercury forming a square to Uranus, the planet of revolution and change, also the planet of modern technology. Now, this square, because of the retrograde, takes place 3 times. So with the first square that we had on that July 21st, we have fiascos and surprises. The second square took place on August 2nd. That would have been associated to some kind of salvaging of a situation, maybe recouping losses. So on August 2nd might have been an attempt to sort of put Humpty Dumpty back together again. It might have been an attempt to salvage a situation. And now with this third and conclusive square of Mercury and Uranus taking place on September 7th, it may be a realization that, maybe all the King's men really can't put Humpty Dumpty back together again. We tried to make it work, but it's not going to work. And so this may be just a feeling of like, okay, we gave it a shot and it's not going to happen. And for those of you in which giving it a second go, a second try does work out, this is great. This is fantastic news. It means that you were able to recover or to recoup or to find a new way to make a situation work. And this is going to give you a feeling that you can now move forward again with your life. But you may find in the weeks ahead that you're not really picking up where you left off and moving forward on the same road. You may discover that certain things have changed and that they have actually changed for the better. Signs most affected are Aries, Gemini, Leo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. On September 8th, the Sun will form an opposition to Saturn. Now, it's going to be hard to believe that you're being sent back to the drawing board yet again. But it's to be expected when the Sun opposes Saturn. Saturn, in astrology, is a withholding energy. We know it as being connected to tests, trials, and tribulations, but Saturn also has an association to an authority figure. This could be a parent, this could be a boss, this could be a client. And Saturn, when it's opposite the Sun, like it will be on September 8th, is withholding. It's withholding of approval, it's withholding of money, it's withholding of support. And so the message for you, because the Sun is now in Virgo, is you need to go back to the drawing board and you need to go and try this idea out again. You need to revise this plan again. Now, this isn't exactly new. In fact, this is something that you've been experiencing for a number of weeks, that whenever you try to present what you've done or to show your results, they're called in question and you're sent back to the beginning. So what's going to happen now with this Sun-Saturn opposition is you may find yourself questioning whether the person in charge isn't themselves out of their element. What I mean by this is that You may be questioning whether a parent is right to make you go back to the drawing board. You may be questioning whether a boss makes you do this because the boss doesn't know what the next step is, that the boss ultimately may not know what they're doing, or that when a client is like, oh, yeah, that was good, let's see it again, it may be because the client really doesn't have a clear idea of what they want. The funny thing about oppositions is that they can, on one hand, represent a break. Okay, they're even famous for splits. They can bring about breakups or splits between people. But what can also happen with an opposition is that you can sort of see the mirror reflection of yourself. Okay, it sort of comes back to you as something you see standing, looking back at you in a mirror, standing, looking back at you on the other side of a looking glass. And this idea that maybe the authority doesn't know what they're doing and that they are somehow procrastinating or delaying by making up more work for you to do. Now, this is something that you may want to bring up, but you don't want to bring it up in a confrontational way. You don't want to bring it up in a defensive way or in any way that makes them look bad. So go ahead and agree that you're going to go back to the drawing board. But at the same time, find a way to include this person more. Find a way to ask them for coaching, for guidance. Is there any way that you can meet with them on a regular basis so as to be sure that you're producing what it is that they're looking for? Not only does this get the authority person involved with your endeavor, but it also gets the person in authority, if they're out of their element or they don't really know what they want, to really begin to see what they want through your ministrations, through your creativity, so that instead of kind of going back and forth with always being sent back to square one again, you're actually going to make headway. And you may wind up with a result that both you and the other person like by September 26th. Signs most affected are Aries, Gemini, Leo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. We all know the drill with Mercury retrograde, right? You don't agree on a deal when Mercury is retrograde. You don't buy and sell when Mercury is retrograde. You can expect communications to be kooky when Mercury is retrograde. And you can also expect a lot of misunderstandings when Mercury is retrograde. What makes this Mercury retrograde different, however, is that Mercury not only turned retrograde in the zodiac sign of Virgo, it changed signs during its retrograde. It retrograded back down into the zodiac sign of Leo, and it did this on August 14th. Now, what happens when Mercury retrogrades from one sign to another is that it's kind of an all bets are off. In other words, what was ever decided or agreed upon during that period of time, when Mercury retrograded back down into the zodiac sign of Leo on August 14th, you might have felt that it was called off, it was delayed, it was questioned, or it was rendered invalid. And this might have gotten you to sort of throw up your hands in frustration and be like, well, that's not what I was originally led to believe. And how can you say it's been rendered invalid? And I never want to do business with you again, or I never want to be friends with you again, or I never feel like I can rely upon you again. All right. So that can happen when we don't get what we want. It can also happen when we were promised that we were going to get something that we wanted and that promise didn't come through. But what happens when Mercury re-enters the sign that initially turned retrograde in? What happens when Mercury re-enters Virgo? Not only is Virgo the sign that Mercury turned retrograde in, Virgo is also the zodiac sign that Mercury rules. What happens basically is that there is a ray of hope. Mercury re-entering the zodiac sign of Virgo signals that this is a good time to reapply, to put in another request, to ask for a do-over. If you were turned down for something, this is a good time to ask the person or the agency who turned you down what you can do next to reapply or to make it work better the second time around. Instead of them saying, it's a done deal, forget it, you may actually find them saying, well, let me walk you through what you need to do, or let me show you how you can improve upon the initial request that you made. Follow this person's guidance, and you may see that request, that application, or that favor. You may see it go through this time, and with great success. Signs most affected are Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, and Capricorn. On September 11th, there will be a first quarter moon in the zodiac sign of Sagittarius. Now, a first quarter moon is a growing moon. It's a moon that's growing in light. It's growing in strength. It's growing in its power and appearance. And so what we have with the first quarter moon is that the sun is in the zodiac sign of Virgo, and the moon is in the zodiac sign of Sagittarius. The sun in Virgo usually has a game plan. It usually has a set way of doing things. And this set way of doing things is based on prior successes. When I did this before, this is what resulted. This was a success. This did very well. And so I'm going to repeat it. I'm going to do it again and again and again. It's what we can call formulaic. Now, sometimes the word formulaic can be used in a negative way, but formulaic is also connected to the idea of manufacture. If you manufacture something successfully, then you reproduce it in an enormous volume, and that increases the amount of money that you make. So formulaic isn't always bad, and formulaic is something that earth signs, particularly Virgo, have an eye on. But what's happening here is that you're going about something in a formulaic approach. You're going about something with a traditional approach, with the way it's always done, and it's always served you before. But you're getting the sense that this time it's not going to do it. This time, someone that you're appealing to isn't convinced. This time, someone you're trying to win over isn't being won over. And what they want from you is something a little bit more. Now, because of the placement of the sun, you may feel like, well, what do you mean something more? This has always worked before. How can you turn your nose up at this? Nevertheless, the person that you're appealing to, maybe it's a buyer, maybe it's a client, maybe it's a love interest, they want something more. They want to see what you have to bring to the table. So what the moon in Sagittarius is asking you to do is to break out of what's safe, to break out of what has always worked before, to be audacious. Audacity is very much a fire sign word, and Sagittarius is a fire sign. Moreover, with Jupiter being the ruler of Sagittarius and Gemini, there's this feeling that if you don't do something now that's very different, that's very in the moment, and that's very spontaneous, you're not going to be the person that they go with. All right. So this first quarter moon in Sagittarius is basically telling you to go for broke. Go and do something wild and crazy. Go and do something that you've never done before, to take off the brakes, to not ride the brake, to put your foot to the accelerator, gun it, go for it. And part of you might be like, no, I can't possibly do it. But you may find another part of you, because the moon rules emotions and it's a first quarter moon in Sagittarius, you may find another part of you that's really exhilarated, that's really thrilled, that's excited to finally have given yourself the permission to go for something full throttle. So what that first quarter moon is asking you to do is to go ahead and take that leap of faith, because this is something that's going to pique the interest of someone who had written you off, and maybe get people who have seen you in a typical way to sort of revisit their impression of you, to maybe even see you in a new and exciting light. Signs most affected are Cancer, Virgo, and Sagittarius. On September 12th, the sun forms a square to Jupiter. This Sun-Jupiter square is what I call a bolstering square. The sun is in the zodiac sign of Virgo, Jupiter is in the zodiac sign of Gemini, and when you review the order of the signs in succession, you know that the sun is ahead of Jupiter. That's because Virgo is further into the year than Gemini is. So the sun is out ahead of Jupiter in its square. This is what's called a separating square. But what's going on here is that Jupiter is supporting the sun. It's saying, you can do this, but the sun is feeling a little bit like it can't. Okay, so you may have this feeling in your life that there were all these new things that you signed on for. Maybe it was a pledge, it was a promise. You swore to yourself that you were going to do things differently. You saw and recognized the necessity of doing things differently. And you also saw and recognized that you've outgrown certain things in your life. You're just not that person anymore. And so the idea of going back to, the idea of subscribing to a belief, the idea of going back to a job that you left because you wanted something different, going back to playing a role in your family that everyone expected you to play. This is something that you don't want to do. This is something that just doesn't appeal to you anymore. And so maybe in the past few weeks, you made certain pledges and said, I'm not going to do that again. Well, when you've got a square, which is combative feelings, a conflict between the planets, there can be this feeling of like having run out of steam, or you're not sure that you can do this. And it's kind of like looking back over your shoulder, and Jupiter behind you is like, come on, you said you could do this. You said you were up for this. This is what you need to do. I believe in you, and you're like, no, okay. So this might be where you find yourself right now. You can't go back, but you don't really feel like you can go forward, and you're betwixt and between. Thankfully, a Sun-Jupiter square, as I said before, is bolstering. It's encouraging. And what you're going to get here is the encouragement. Certain people in your life coming through and saying you can do this, or circumstances breaking in such a way that invite you to take the next step, so that it would really have to be an act of will to not move forward. And this is where you find out if you're going to ally with your fears and anxieties, or whether you're going to ally with your hopes, dreams, and aspirations. Now, there may be a lot of trying to talk yourself out of it. There may be a lot of trying to undermine yourself. But if you lend yourself to that Jupiterian spirit, and Jupiter is always about inspiration, Jupiter is always about belief. If you align yourself to that inspiration, and if you align yourself to that belief, you're going to find this Sun-Jupiter square to be very enlivening and very exciting, and just the thing you need to clear that last hurdle. Signs most affected are Gemini, Leo, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. On September 15th, Venus forms a trine to Jupiter. Trines are wonderful aspects in astrology because they take a good thing and they make it better. What makes this even better than better is that you have the two benefics, Venus and Jupiter, forming a trine in the zodiac signs of Libra and Gemini. These are the air signs. The air signs have to do with the way that people get along with one another. So air signs rule over relationships, they rule over alliances, and they rule over the way that people are going to live together in a group, all right? They're going to live together in a society. So when we have a trining energy between Venus and Gemini, this is almost like a rainbow following a storm. Whatever had been discordant, whatever had been disruptive, whatever had been difficult, where people were angry at one another or they were sworn to never get along, now you'll find them putting aside their differences. But they're not going to just sort of like put aside their differences because they're having a kumbaya moment or anything along these lines. What happens when Venus forms a trine to Jupiter is that there's an extension of an olive branch, and that olive branch is going to be accepted. So this is a good time for you to approach someone that you may have been on the outs with, someone in which you had really had your differences. This is the time to approach that person with a gesture of peace, to approach that person in the spirit of a truce, because that person may very well be open to it right now. Now, as I said, it's not just sort of an overall forgiveness. It isn't just some sort of great act of clemency that's going to take place here. What we have with the Jupiter in Gemini is talking about the particular issues. Okay, these were the points that didn't work. These were the points of contention. These were the things that I was angry about when I said, I'm never going to talk to you again. So Jupiter in Gemini opens up conversation. Gemini is perhaps the most conversational of all the signs in astrology. And so Jupiter in Gemini really opens up that conversation. When you bring in Venus and Libra, what you bring in is someone who's listening. Libras are the listeners of the zodiac. They're the ones who really take in what the other person is saying. They will ask questions to get the person to talk. They want to take in the other side of the story. And they're doing this because they want to arrive at good judgment. So when you have conversational Gemini, Jupiter in conversational Gemini, really trying to rebuild a bridge with Venus in diplomatic Libra, then the chances of this happening are going to be very successful. But again, this isn't going to be done in a all is forgiven and all is well. This is going to be done through a real engaged discussion that takes place. What the trine brings is the change in temperament. It opens a heart. It opens closed ears. It changes the mind of someone. They're willing to hear things from your point of view. And this is the thing that's going to bring this about. What you're going to find out as you talk is that the contest is over. The fight is finished, and that it's time to make peace. Another reason that it's time to make peace is that you don't have the financial or the emotional capacity to continue with this feud. And what's also happening is that the person that you're feuding with, the party that you're feuding with, they also lack the emotional or the financial capacity to continue it as well. So that's why the two of you are going to come together in this moment. You can't afford to continue waging the battle that you've been waging. So find a place where you can sit down and talk, and you will settle your differences quickly and amicably. Signs most affected are Taurus, Gemini, Virgo, and Libra. On September 17th, we will have a lunar eclipse in the zodiac sign of Pisces. Now, a lunar eclipse is astrology's version of a come to Jesus moment. Now, it's not going to do this by calling you out or shaming you or forcing you to renounce your evil ways, although that might not be a bad idea if you're on the course of some unhealthy behavior. Going and retracing your steps isn't the worst idea, but that's not what's going to be going on with this lunar eclipse in the zodiac sign of Pisces. What this lunar eclipse in Pisces is going to do is that it's going to show you exactly what is not working in your life. Lunar eclipses are an unraveling energy, okay? They are connected to this idea that things that always worked for you are suddenly unraveling and they're falling apart. They're not holding ground. They don't have security, the stability, the sustainability that they used to have. Sometimes that can be an action that we've taken that we insist is right, and that if we just keep doing it, it will eventually work. During a lunar eclipse, we see that it's not going to work, that it's just going to collapse there, that we don't have the energy to continue as is. What we might also experience during a lunar eclipse is this feeling that we had committed ourselves to a situation, we would do anything for it, and now whatever obligation or responsibility we committed ourselves to just has lost its relevance. It's lost its oomph. It just doesn't have that kind of gravitas that it had before. And the final thing that can happen during a lunar eclipse is that we can have a health issue. That's because the moon rules the body. And sometimes when we've got a lunar eclipse, we can suffer a health issue, which can alert us to a way in which we are not taking care of our body in a good or healthy manner. So these are things that you can expect to deal with when we have a lunar eclipse. But there's a greater purpose that's being served with this lunar eclipse in Pisces. Remember, the message of it is to show you what is not working. A lunar eclipse's job is to remove all the dead wood, okay? It's to remove the extraneous responsibilities, the chores that we do just because they need to be done. It's to remove the negative things we tell ourselves. It's also there to remove the fantasies that are a fantasy, the aspirations that just are not doable, or the ambitions that we've seized upon just because we want to have them. And the ambition isn't necessarily a reflection of what our talents and skills are, or even where our interests may lay. The lunar eclipse is going to insist that you clear out all of these things, and it's in order to make room for fresh growth. Now, it's within human nature to say, like, okay, I'll do that as soon as I know what I'm growing into. I'll do that when I see what the next step is going to be. Not with this lunar eclipse taking place in Pisces. It's going to insist that you do this and that you leave an empty space. You have a clean closet, since we're using that as an analogy here, and that you leave it like that. You don't fill it in with anything new. So you may feel like there are a number of things that are leaving your life during this period of time. And what I want you to do is to go with the flow, to get into that Pisces mindset of just going with the flow and letting things leave your life. Some of these leave takings may be a bit painful, but again, as I said, it's in order to remove the dead wood and to make room for new, fresh growth. Signs most affected are Gemini, Cancer, Virgo, Scorpio, Sagittarius, and Pisces. The lunar eclipse will be followed by a Mercury-Saturn opposition taking place on September 18th. Mercury-Saturn opposition is basically one of those sobering realizations that take place. Mercury is the planet of the mind. It rules over the way that we think. And when it's opposite Saturn, like what I referenced before with the Sun-Saturn opposition, something is being withheld from you. You're not going to get what you want in a Mercury-Saturn opposition. You're not going to get what you think you should have. Things aren't going to turn out the way that you expected them to turn out. And this is something that you sort of have to accept. A Mercury-Saturn opposition is like going and knocking on a door with the expectation that someone's going to open it and invite you inside. So you go and you knock on the door and you stand on the other side of the door and you're waiting to be let in. And some time passes and you're kind of like, well, maybe they didn't hear me the first time. And you go and you knock on the door again, and some time passes and it's like, well, I don't want to be obnoxious or anything, but okay, I'm going to go ahead and ring the doorbell. And you ring the doorbell. Nothing happens. You ring it again. Nothing happens. You ring it a third time. Nothing happens. And then you start telling yourself, well, maybe they didn't hear me. Maybe I'll try them on the phone. Maybe if I sit here and wait for them to come. A Mercury-Saturn opposition is like standing outside a closed door with no one on the other side of it. What it can bring about, when I said a sobering realization, is that plan that you had, that strategy that you had, that angle that you were going to work, it isn't going to work. You're not going to get what you want. And so again, it's human nature to sort of like, well, fill in the blanks. Maybe this person was called away to go and do something at work, or maybe an emergency happened, or maybe, and we can start to fill our head with all sorts of scenarios. We can start to manufacture scenarios. We can start to manufacture explanations or reasons to wait. But if we were to leave the closed door, we would be accepting the finality. If we maybe hang out on the stoop in front of the closed door, the person might come by. They might have been busy with something else. What this Mercury-Saturn opposition is getting you to do is to take no as an answer, okay? You aren't going to get what you want. This person isn't going to say yes. You aren't going to get the approval. And what the Mercury-Saturn opposition is also asking you to do is to stop making excuses, to stop manufacturing scenarios, to stop putting energy into this closed door, and to move on. It's not easy accepting that things aren't going to turn out the way that you wanted them to turn out. But what happens when you accept no as a no? It's liberating. You're suddenly free to move on to another door where there may indeed be someone on the other side of it ready to welcome you inside. Signs most affected are Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, Capricorn, and Pisces. On September 22nd, the Sun will trine Pluto for the last time in Capricorn in our lifetimes. And on September 22nd, Venus will square Pluto in Capricorn for the last time in our lifetimes. This configuration of planets is as complex as it is profound. And instead of trying to break down each one of them, what I wanted to do was share with you a myth, a story that immediately came to my mind when I thought of this particular dance that the planets are making in the sky. What it put me in mind of was the myth of Orpheus. Orpheus, in Greek mythology, was a famous poet and singer. He had a lyre, which was basically a harp that he played, and when he played it, he would calm the most savage beast. He would make men who wanted to go to war feel pacified. He would make insects stop and listen. And he would make trees sway and even rocks roll after him. The music that he played was so signature. It was so unique to Orpheus. His power to move the soul on deep and profound levels was incomparable. Nobody else could do it. So Orpheus was famous throughout all of Greece. Everyone in Greece knew exactly who Orpheus was. Everyone in Greece also knew that Orpheus's great love was Eurydice. Eurydice was a young woman of Orpheus's age, and when she would sing along with him, it would be like a blessed heavenly choir had suddenly descended down from the clouds and made its place here on earth. So when Orpheus and Eurydice announced their marriage, everyone came from all around to participate. There were kings and heads of state. There were shepherds and common folk. There were nymphs and nereids. There were artists and craftsmen and singers as well. Everyone was so happy for this couple to be getting married. They were so delighted, and they were ready to join together in song, dance, and poetry. What happened on the wedding day is that Eurydice was bitten by a venomous snake, and she gasped, looked down at her foot, and immediately fell into a dead faint. And her friends were absolutely shocked and didn't know what to do. Didn't know what to do as the color drained out of Eurydice's face, her hands, and her feet. One of them went running to tell Orpheus, and Orpheus immediately came running and held his beloved as she breathed her last. And he was full of anguish. He was full of agony. And the wedding, immediately everyone was quiet and they gathered around and they looked at Eurydice and they were just, this was the most horrible, tragic thing that could possibly happen. So Orpheus didn't want to accept at first that she had died. He had to accept that she did. She was buried. She was laid to rest. The friends in the community dispersed. People tried to be consoling and supporting. And Orpheus had just shook his head. His Eurydice had been his little world, and the light in his life had gone out, and he didn't know what to do with himself. And he was inconsolable. Nobody could offer him company. Nobody could offer him comfort. Nobody could offer him relief. Days passed, and weeks passed, and months passed, and Orpheus was seized by an idea. He was seized by an idea that he was going to go and rescue Eurydice. And he went and he announced that. And people were like, what are you talking about? You can't rescue Eurydice. I mean, she's dead. What are you talking about? Are you going to try to bring her back from the dead? And he's like, yes, yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And they're like, Orpheus, yeah, and he left. He went on. He left. He went on a pilgrimage. He went on a pilgrimage to find the land of the dead. And the land of the dead was far to the west. It was far to the west where the sun sets every night. And so he got on a ship that was heading in that direction. He had heard stories that if you kept traveling towards this set of islands, that you would enter into an area of swampland and of gases coming up from the earth. And people would say, don't go, don't go. And he insisted on going. And he kept traveling until he found that cave, that opening where you descended down into the underworld. Now, Orpheus stood there at the edge of this gaping maw, peering into the darkness in which there was no light. There were no shades or gradations of light. He could smell the gas that was emitting from underneath the swamp, the sulfuric scent in the air. And he braced himself and he took his lyre and he strummed on the lyre and he sang. This is the first time that he sang since Eurydice lay dead at his feet. This was the first time that he sang since he held her lifeless body in his arms. And so he strummed on the harp again and he sang some more. And as he strummed on his lyre, as he sang, he descended down into the underworld, right? He descended down into the underworld. As he made his descent, Hermes arrived. Hermes, the messenger god of Zeus, the guide of all of us. Hermes, like Mercury, helps us to get from one place to another. But Hermes in Greek mythology was also the only god who could travel between Earth and the underworld. All right. So Hermes arrived and he showed Orpheus the way, and he continued strumming and he continued singing. As he descended into the darkness, he could see the shades of people. At first, they sort of scattered around, almost like insects, as they scattered from boulder to boulder, and they looked at him, almost like prisoners who had been denied the light of day for years were suddenly looking at this person. They didn't know what to make of him. They smelled, and he wasn't like a deceased soul. He was different from all of them. And so they were a little frightened and they maybe backed away. And he sang to them. And what he sang to them was his grief. He sang to them of his heartbreak, of his sorrow at the loss of Eurydice. And as he sang, the frightened spirits of the dead grew near, and they looked at him, and they even began to remember. They even began to remember what it was like to be alive, to live in light, to see the sun, and to see the moon. And they weren't frightened by him, and they followed him. And he sang as he progressed forward, and he came to where Charon, who was the ferryman of the dead, who basically ferried dead people from the shore, the newly departed, into the realm of Hades, and you had to have a coin to give to him. Charon looked at Orpheus and lifted his palm, and then he took it back again, and he realized that Orpheus wasn't one of them. He wasn't dead. And Orpheus continued his song of grief, of sorrow, of heartbreak. And Charon remembered things that we don't even know what had happened in his life. And a tear came down his cheek, and he offered Orpheus passage across the river Styx, down into the depths of hell. And there at the gates of hell was Cerberus, the three-headed dog, who looked up. All three heads looked up from where he had been resting. And he lowered his nose and smelled Orpheus, who was this different scent. It wasn't like everyone else. And Orpheus continued his song. And Cerberus was pacified. Instead of roaring or gnashing his teeth and being the hideous monster, the frightening giant three-headed dog that he was, Cerberus lowered his head and he allowed Orpheus passage. And so Hermes led Orpheus into the throne world of Pluto, the throne world of Hades. And Pluto had been given the realm of the dead when he and his two brothers, Jupiter and Neptune, had cast lots of what realms that they would rule over. Jupiter came out ahead, and so he would rule over sky. Poseidon came in second, so he would rule over the realm of oceans. And Pluto came out with the short end of the stick, and so he ruled over the realm of the dead. He ruled the underworld, that place that lies beneath the roots of trees, that place where bodies are buried, that place where silver and gold and precious metals are kept in a sort of treasure trove, this place beneath the world. Pluto has a wife, and his wife was Persephone. Persephone was at one point a goddess who lived on the surface of the world until she had been abducted by Pluto and taken down below. And what's fascinating about Pluto and his wife Persephone is that in Greek mythology, the other Greek gods would mate with other goddesses and women, and they were known for their wild and crazy love affairs. But Pluto had one love, and Pluto's one love was Persephone. And so Persephone had to spend 6 months below with Pluto, and then she got to return to her mother Ceres for 6 months above on the earth. Hermes, actually, the person who's guiding Orpheus to see them, brokered that custody battle over Persephone that had taken place centuries before, where Ceres, her mother, Demeter, her mother, had battled against Pluto. She had challenged that marriage and wanted her daughter back. And then it was decided ultimately that Persephone would spend 6 months beneath the earth in the realm of the dead and 6 months above. And so what happened is that Persephone became an intermediary between the living and the dead. Because she lived a life above the surface and below the surface, she knew what it was like to suffer. She wasn't removed from the pain and suffering of living mortals like Pluto was. She felt for them. And indeed, Persephone was a goddess that you prayed to at the hour of your death. She's basically the influence for the Virgin Mary, who again was a figure that Catholics prayed to at the hour of their death, because Mary, who was the mother of God, also knew what it was like to be immortal. She knew what it was like to be someone who could die. Mary indeed does die before she, is placed in heaven. Persephone was the progenitor of this idea. She was someone that people would pray to, that she might intervene with Pluto so that he might not be so severe, so punishing of their deeds, that she would bring an element of mercy and compassion to their fate, to their ultimate judgment of whether they would go to Tartarus, which was basically the Greek version of hell, or the Elysian Fields, which was the Greek version of heaven. So here, Orpheus makes his case in the court of Pluto. He makes his case for the return of his beloved Eurydice. And he speaks to Pluto, who looks unmoved. And he speaks to Persephone, who is listening. And he takes out his lyre and he begins to sing. And he sings of what he knows, which is his lost love. Pluto and Persephone were no strangers to love. They were no strangers to loss. And so they were both moved, but Pluto, being a male god, didn't show it. And Persephone, being someone who knows what it's like for mortals to suffer, and then to come into an area where you have been abducted by death, you've been taken away from the world and put into the world that you don't. she beseeches Pluto. She is the person that Orpheus, facing the hour of death, beseeches, and she responds and she turns to Pluto and she says, can we let Eurydice go? Can we let Eurydice return to the surface? You know what it's like, my husband, when I return to the surface and I am not here. And I know how you grieve for that, how much you miss me, and how much you look forward to the day when I return. Can we not do the same for Orpheus? Mortals, after all, my dear husband, do not live a very long time. You're not breaking some horrible rule here. You're not setting up some terrible precedent. You're showing clemency. You're showing mercy this once, to let this man who lost his beloved on his wedding day, to let them be reunited and to live out the remainder of their short lives. So Pluto, moved by his wife's words, because Pluto loved Persephone very deeply, Pluto, moved by his wife's words, says, yes, yes, yes. I will release Eurydice to you, Orpheus. And Orpheus, he stops in mid-verse. He cannot believe his good fortune. And Pluto says, I know exactly where Eurydice is, and I will summon her, and she will come here, and she will follow you out as you ascend back up to the land of the living, as you ascend back up to the surface world. And Orpheus is like, thank you, master, thank you, thank you. And Pluto says, but on one condition. Pluto is a deity. He doesn't show up a lot in Greek mythology, but when he does, there's always a condition. There's always an ironic twist. There's always a very simple thing that Pluto puts forward, all right, that can sometimes end up being the stumbling block, and so Pluto says, she'll return with you to the surface world, but under one condition. And Orpheus is like, yes, yes, master. Yes, my God. Yes, Pluto, lord of the underworld. What is that condition? And Pluto says, she will follow you up out of this dark, abysmal space where there is no light and where there is no life. She will follow you up and she will follow you to the surface, but at no point are you to turn around and look at her. Because the moment that you turn around and look at her, she will disappear and you will never be close to her again. And Orpheus is like, oh, no, yes, I can do that. And Pluto is, do you trust me on this? And Orpheus is like, yes, I do trust. And Pluto says, do you trust Eurydice to follow you? And Orpheus is like, yes, I trust. And Pluto says, do you trust yourself? And Orpheus is like, I love her. I love her more than anything. I trust myself, absolutely. And Pluto says, then go the way you came. And so Hermes shows Orpheus the way out, and Orpheus takes a few steps and he stops and he looks at Hermes and he's like, and Hermes says, yes, she's right behind you. And Orpheus is like, she's right behind me. And Hermes is like, yes, she's right behind you. Go, Orpheus, go. And know that she is right behind you. And so Orpheus goes and he sings, and Cerberus is pacified, and Charon gives him passage, and the spirits of the dead see him off, and he continues singing, he continues climbing, but he hasn't seen her. He didn't see her when she was brought into the court. He had to ask Hermes if she was behind him, and Hermes said yes. So he trusts that she's behind him, and so he sings, because that's a wonderful thing. But then he stops in his singing, and he's like, well, certainly if she were behind me, I'd be able to hear her footsteps. Okay, so he takes a step forward, and he stops and he listens, and he doesn't hear anything. He takes another step forward and he stops and he listens and he doesn't hear anything. And the reason he doesn't hear anything is because when he steps forward, she steps forward. And when he takes another step forward, she takes another step forward. There's no echo, there's no stopgap of time. She is following him up to the surface world. She is following his lead exactly as Pluto had dictated. And Orpheus begins to play again, and he listens for her voice. Remember, once she used to sing with him, he doesn't hear it. He stops playing and he climbs and he doesn't hear anything, but he trusts Pluto. He trusts Hermes. He trusts Eurydice, and he climbs and he can't, he doesn't understand why the ascent seemed longer than the descent, why returning seems 3 times as long, and he's not even sure if this is the right way or whatever. But Hermes, he can still see as a shadowy figure, showing the way forward. And so he follows, but he also becomes seized with doubt. He becomes seized with anxiety. What if she turned left when he turned right? You can barely see down here in the dark. What if he's been made a fool of? What if she's not following at all? What if she's, I don't know, a skeleton or something like that? I mean, he really becomes plagued with all of these doubts and these fears, but nevertheless, he can start to see the sunlight. He can start to see the entrance, and he gets up. He gets up just right to the place where the underworld meets the surface world. He can see the light. He can smell the outside. They're just about there. And he turns around and he looks at her to reach out. And in that moment, she cries a silent cry. And in that moment, Hermes takes her back, down, down, down. She slips from his grasp. Hermes takes her back down, down, down into the underworld. And Orpheus is left twice heartbroken. As you can imagine, if Orpheus was inconsolable before, he's worse now. And he returns to the surface world knowing that this time he was the reason for why he had lost her, that he had given in to fear and anxiety, and he doesn't know what to do. And he grabs the lyre and he just sings of his pain, but it's not the grief of loss that he has sung before, the grief of loss that the denizens of the underworld had recognized and felt sympathetic and drawn towards. No, 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 no. It's not that at all. It's discordant. It's agony. It's self-criticism, judgment, self-hatred. It's awful to listen to. And he is like a madman as he stumbles out of hell, singing, crying out these awful, you can't even listen to it. It shrieks. It's shrill. It's guttural. It's and people are repulsed by him. Animals are repulsed by him. Even friends and loved ones try to, but they can't listen to it. He's just what grief doesn't describe where he is. And finally, some wild women, Maniads, they were followers of Bacchus, of Dionysus. They can't stand listening to it anymore. Like it's a horrible neighbor, playing awful music above your room in an apartment or a dorm or something like that. You just can't take it anymore, and you knock at the door and come on in and say, turn that off, or something like that. Well, Maniads don't do that. What they did is that they fell upon Orpheus, these followers of Dionysus, these wild women who had left their lives years ago, decades ago. They fall upon Orpheus and they rend him limb from limb. That's where that phrase comes from. They tear out his arms and his legs, and they tear off his head, and anything to bring to an end this awful, cacophonous, agonizing music, and they bring the silence, and everyone hears it, and they take the head of Orpheus and they throw it into the river. But instead of sinking, as decapitated heads are wont to do, instead of singing, Orpheus's head bobs to the surface of the river, and it's carried downstream. And as it's carried downstream, it sings. There's a piece that he sings of. He sings these baleful tunes, but they're not discordant. They sing of the grief of mortality and how short our lives are. Eventually, the 9 muses, who are the followers of Apollo, gather together his limbs and they bury his body properly. But his head is swept up on the shore of Lesbos, the island Lesbos in Greece, and it is placed in a temple, and Orpheus becomes an oracle. He tells of the future, and people come from far and wide to hear of his poetic visions, of his song of their futures. And they sit and they surround this oracular Orpheus wrapped in wonder. So what does this have to do with Pluto at the last degrees of Capricorn? What does this have to do with the sun's final trine, with Venus's final square? What's going on here? We can't easily go into Pluto's world and come back out again, okay? Mercury is named after a god who can travel from heaven to earth to hell and back again. Mercury does this all the time, but Mercury's the only one. We may be able to step out of water onto a beach. We may be able to step out of a house onto a street. We experience all kinds of transitions in our life. A transition involving Pluto is much more rare. As I said at the beginning of today's episode, Pluto is about that journey down into the depths, the lower depths of who you are, or it can be a journey down into the lower depths of life itself. And sometimes that journey is too arduous. Sometimes that journey is too much. And that journey down into the lower depths of ourselves or of our lives may be something that we don't return from, psychologically. It's like when someone goes off to war and they come back from war, and maybe they've seen a lot of action, and maybe they've been harmed, and they don't know how to leave that war and accept that they're not living in a war-torn area. Or think of the different areas on Earth that are war-torn, in which homes and hopes have been leveled and have been destroyed. What do these people call upon then? These are all Plutonian experiences. And sometimes we're so overwhelmed by the pain to the ordeal itself that we don't know how to come back from it, that it's scarred us, that it's something that we, that holds a stronger gravitational pull on our psyche than, life on the surface does, And sometimes we go through these things and we are transformed. We are transformed head to foot, soul, heart, mind, and spirit. We are absolutely transformed. Orpheus is a famous myth for someone who goes down into the underworld and comes back up and loses his love in the end, and a lot of times it's interpreted as a tragedy or an exercise in futility. But when we look at it from an astrological perspective, when we look at Pluto as ruling the lower depths of our horoscope, the lower depths of our experience, when we look at it in that way, then we kind of understand what Pluto saw and Orpheus didn't. When Pluto says, you cannot turn around and look at Eurydice. If you do, you will lose her altogether. And he's like, absolutely, I won't turn around and look at Eurydice. And Pluto says, do you trust me? And he says, yes. Do you trust Eurydice? Yes. Do you trust yourself? Yes. It's a sad moment for Pluto because Pluto knows Orpheus isn't going to make it. Pluto already knows and can see what's going to happen. But Pluto asks something. He asks something in our chart. A lot of times we are asked to have faith in God, whatever God may mean to you. Maybe it's an institutionalized religion. Maybe it's a belief. Maybe it's a spiritual quest. Maybe God is the universe. We're asked to have faith in God, okay? And a lot of those times, that faith in God was pretty much Jupiter. And Jupiter in the chart is that faith in a higher purpose, a higher being, a better way of being, a faith in a moral universe. What we're not always asked to have faith in is Pluto. Okay, Pluto is seen as an enemy. It's named after the god of death. Who wants to think about death or that we're all going to die one day? And how are we going to die? And what will our final days be like? And oh my God, the thoughts and the ideas are frightening. No one wants to think about that voluntarily. And yet there are people who live with that all the time through depression or through the anxieties, the battles that they fight with themselves. And they know how isolating that can be, how people can't reach them. And that can be a terrible, awful struggle. Pluto in an astrological chart asks us to have faith in the dark God, right? Faith in the dark God, faith in the lower depths, to not explain them away, to not dress them up with Christmas tree ornaments or morals to the tale, or this is the way that things are going to be, or to just be blindly obedient. Pluto asks us to have a blind faith in a dark God, a God that we cannot see. And that is not necessarily allied with destruction, but with nature. Nature can be destructive. Human nature can be destructive. People go to war with one another, and they can be destructive, and that side of human nature can be dark and odious. But Pluto is asking us to have faith that there is a deeper meaning in all of it. For people who have undergone this transit that Pluto began in Capricorn from 2008 to now, some of you may have felt broken by it, and then some of you may have felt like you really engaged yourself, and some of you may have been broken to engage yourself. But in some degree, that transformation has been quite singular, and it has been pivotal, and it has been powerful. And it's not about having been lost and now found. It's having journeyed down into the lower depths of yourself, being asked to make the journey back up. But there's a condition. Don't look back. Don't look over your shoulder to make sure that that thing that you went seeking is behind you. That thing you went seeking, that, let's call it a deep part of yourself, your inner Eurydice that you went seeking, is stepping as you step, walking as you walk. It's there with you. And if you can trust in its following you, okay, and in the strength that comes from having made that journey, then you will feel a strength, a centeredness, and a courage in your life, unlike anything ever felt before. And that is Pluto's great gift. As the sun trines it for the last time, as the Venus squares it for the last time, with loss comes something irreplaceable. Okay, that's the great gift, and something to think about in the weeks ahead as Pluto concludes its stay in the zodiac sign of Capricorn. Signs most affected are Aries, Taurus, Cancer, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Capricorn, and Pisces. On September 30th, Mars trines Saturn. Bravery isn't something that only shows up when the stakes are high or the odds are against us. Bravery can also show up in the most unexpected way, like when Mars forms a trine to Saturn on September 30th. This will be when a bully or someone who you've always felt has oppressed you or dominated you, this is when the two of you will assume your familiar positions of oppressor and oppressed. Except this time, when the person threatens to dominate you or control you or to take something away, this time you may hear yourself say to yourself, I'm not afraid. And that realization will be a quiet realization. It's not something that you have to holler from the rooftops or parade around in triumph, but you can let yourself say it out loud. You can say, I'm not afraid. I'm not frightened. And the other person might find themselves taken aback a little bit, like they don't know what to do with it. And you may find yourself all of a sudden a stream of information of saying, I'm not frightened. I'm not afraid of you anymore. And it might be because you can suddenly see what drives this person, why this person acts in the way that they do. And you can suddenly see the way that you play out in this drama. You can suddenly see that by enfeebling yourself, you're actually enabling this person to go act the way that they do. And all of a sudden find yourself being very conversational about it. Like, oh, don't you see, these are the positions we always take. You always insist that I'm not worthy of this. I'm not good enough for this or whatever. And maybe I'm not. And if I'm not, then maybe we should just not have anything to do with one another, and if that's the case, then that's the way it's going to be. So it's not a conflict that brings this out. This isn't you, in a Popeye moment, popping open a can of spinach, gulping it down and, growing huge biceps and knocking that Bluto off his rocker. No, this will be a very quiet realization of I'm not afraid. I'm not frightened anymore. And it doesn't even have to do with this person. It's almost existential. And this is the beauty of trines in water. Mars and Saturn are two planets that are always associated with bad things. They're the malefics in astrology. But when they trine, especially in an element like water, they can bring an emotional insight to why the victim assumes the position of being submissive. And it can suddenly be like, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to play that game anymore. And then something changes inside of you. Something moves inside of you in a very deep and a very profound way. Now, this might result in you emerging victorious, and that would be a lovely thing. But like I said before, it doesn't matter if it does or doesn't. What matters is the dynamic has changed. What matters most is that you've faced your fear. Fear is your oppressor. And when you face your fear under the auspices of a Mars-Saturn trine, you look your fear in the eye and you hold the gaze of your fear. And it's your fear. It's your fear that's going to be the one that blinks first. And in that moment when your fear blinks first, you will know that you are bigger than it and that your fear has been made all the smaller. Signs most affected are Aries, Cancer, Scorpio, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. If you enjoyed what you saw, please press the like button. It helps more than you know. If you could subscribe, that would be wonderful. I've had such a wonderful time visiting with you this week, and I can't wait to get together next time on Christopher Renstrom Astrology.